The clock was wrong, and I was the only person in the Kingdom of Eldermoor whose whole life had trained her to know exactly how wrong. 6 minutes and 40 seconds. Not 5, not 7, not a lazy round number a tired mechanism might drift toward. 6 minutes and 40 seconds slow, measured against the marine chronometer I carried in my apron pocket, and it had been exactly that much slow the last 3 mornings running. A clock that is dying loses time differently every day, a little more, a little less, the way a sick man's breathing wanders. A clock that loses the same wrong number every single day is not sick. It is being interfered with by a hand that puts it back afterward, and does not quite get the hour right. I am Wren Aldergate, and I keep the clocks of Harrowgate Palace. 211 of them, from the great astronomical tower over the fountain court to the little enameled carriage clock on the Queen's own writing desk, and I know each of them the way a shepherd knows his flock, by the sound of them, by their small dishonesties, by which of them run fast in the cold and which sulk in the damp. My father kept them before me, and his mother before him, and the first thing either of them taught me was that a clock never lies about what it is. It only tells you the truth of whatever hand last touched it. So on the third morning of the wrong 6 minutes and 40 seconds, kneeling on the cold parquet of the cabinet room with my ear against the walnut case of the great long-case clock they call the weaver's regulator, I was not confused. I was afraid. Because somebody had been in this locked room in the dead hours, and had touched this clock, and had put it back wrong, and I could not for my life imagine why. Let me set the room for you, because the room is the whole story, and I did not understand that yet. The cabinet room is not grand. That is its dignity. It sits at the end of the long passage on the second floor of the old East Range, a plain paneled chamber with 3 tall windows looking down into the Physic Garden, and it is called the cabinet room because the late Queen Isolde, mother of our own good Queen Saraland, used it as her private working room in the last years of her life, and filled it with cabinets. Not treasure cabinets. Working cabinets, shallow drawers of raw fleece and combed wool, a rack of dye samples fading gently on their cards, a great oak loom under a linen sheet in the corner that no one had touched in the 11 years since she died. Queen Isolde was the one the country still calls the Weaver Queen, and not as a courtesy. She truly wove. She had come to the throne from a minor house in the wool country of the north, and she never lost the belief that a queen who could not make a useful thing with her own 2 hands had no business asking the poor to make useful things with theirs. She founded the weaving guilds that pulled 3 northern counties out of ruin. She founded the hospices where the dying are wrapped in wool spun by children she paid to learn the craft. And she did her thinking at that loom, in that plain room, with the wool smell and the light off the Physic Garden. And when she died, the family sealed the room as she had left it, and gave the nation a promise that it would be kept exactly so. A working room kept working, the loom always strung, the fire laid, a candle ready, as though she had only stepped out to walk in the garden and might come back at any hour and take up the shuttle. I keep the clock in that room. That is my only errand there once a fortnight, to wind and regulate the weaver's regulator, which she had loved, and which had stood at her shoulder while she worked. It is a beautiful, honest instrument, a tall walnut long case with a plain silver dial and a slow, deep, unhurried tick, and until that week it had never given me a moment's trouble in the 9 years I had kept it. Now it was losing 6 minutes and 40 seconds a day, and putting itself back wrong, and there is no honest way for a clock to do that alone. I want to tell you that I raised the alarm at once. I did not. I want you to understand why, because everything I did afterward and everything I did not do turned on that first decision, and I have gone over it 1,000 times since. The cabinet room is under seal, not the Queen's seal and not the guards. It is under the personal seal of the keeper of the cabinet, the great officer of the household who has charge of the late Queen Isolde's rooms and relics, who holds the only key, who alone may authorize the room's opening. And the keeper of the cabinet in that year was the Lady Verena Ashcombe. You would have to have lived in the palace to understand what that name meant. Lady Ashcombe was the most admired woman in the Kingdom of Eldermoor, who did not wear a crown. She had been the Weaver Queen's own dear friend and lady-in-waiting. She had held the old Queen's hand at the end. She had, by the family's grateful gift, been made keeper of the relics of the woman she had loved, and she had kept them with a devotion the whole court held up as the very model of loyalty. She was silver-haired and beautiful and soft-voiced, and she remembered the name of every servant's child, and she gave to the hospices. And once a year on the Weaver Queen's birthday, she stood in the cabinet room in a gray gown and received the family and wept, gently, real tears, while they laid a spray of northern heather by the sheeted loom. To go to my captain of that household, or to the guard, or God help me to the Queen, and say I think someone has been in Lady Ashcombe's sealed room in the night, when the only person permitted in that room was Lady Ashcombe herself, was to say a thing so close to an accusation of the unaccusable that I would have been thanked, kindly, and moved to some cold post in the servants' offices where broken clocks and broken clock keepers are quietly kept apart from the great ones. I had a mother in the almshouses that my wage supported. I had a trade I loved, and I had, against all of that, 6 minutes and 40 seconds. So I did the disciplined thing, which was the hardest thing, which was nothing. I wound the clock. I set it right. I noted the fault in my daybook in the neutral hand my father taught me, Weaver's regulator, losing 6 M40s daily, cause not yet found, and I said not one word to a living soul. And I resolved to find out, quietly and by myself, what hand was touching my clock in the dark. That was the whole of my plan. It was a small plan, and it very nearly killed me, and before it was done it had reached all the way up to the Queen, and all the way back 11 years to a dying woman's loom, and it had turned on the stillness of one man I had, until that week, barely troubled to notice. His name was Corporal Havard Wren, and he stood the night post outside the cabinet room door. I had passed him 100 times without seeing him, the way you pass the newel post at the foot of a stair. That is the first thing you must understand about the men who hold the inner posts of Harrowgate. They are trained to be furniture, and they are very good at it. The soldiers you know from the photographs, the red tunics and the tall black bearskins on the forecourt, motionless while the tourists shout and the flags snap, those are the day men, the ceremonial face of the house of Harrowgate. Wren was not one of those. He was a night-warden of the inner corridors, in the plain dark uniform they wear when the cameras have gone home, and his whole craft was to stand in a doorway from midnight to dawn and be less noticeable than the shadow he cast. He was perhaps 40, broad and quiet, with a still gray face and pale eyes that moved when nothing else about him did, and he had held the cabinet room post for 6 years without, so far as I knew, ever once saying anything to anyone that was not required. I began to watch the clock at night. That was the plan's first foolishness. I told the underkeeper I was troubled about the tower regulator and would sit up with it in the horology room, which was true enough and gave me a reason to be about the palace in the small hours, and then on the third such night I did not go to the tower at all. I went quietly, in soft shoes, along the servants' passage that runs behind the east range, to the little disused pantry that shares a wall with the cabinet room, and I let myself in with a key I had no business still holding, and I sat down in the dark among the empty shelves to listen. I could hear the clock through the wall, that deep, slow, honest tick. I had brought my chronometer and a shaded candle, and I sat and I listened and I timed, and for 2 hours nothing happened at all except the great house settling and far off, the quarter bells of the tower I was pretending to mind. And then, a little after 3, I heard the cabinet room door open. Not the corridor door. I would have heard boots in the passage, the small challenge and countersign the warden's exchange, the ordinary machinery of the night watch. This was the inner room on the far side of my wall, and it opened with the particular sound a heavy old door makes when someone who knows it lifts it slightly on its hinges to keep it from crying out. Someone was in the cabinet room. Someone who had come not down the guarded corridor past Corporal Wren but from somewhere else entirely, and there was nowhere else. I knew that room. It had one door, 3 windows 2 floors up over a walled garden and 4 solid walls. There was no other way in. And yet someone was in it. I heard the soft scrape of a chair. I heard, very faintly, the click and whir of the weaver's regulator being opened at the trunk, the little run of the going train as a hand checked the pendulum, the small resettling as the door of the case was closed again. Someone was, at that moment, on the other side of 11 inches of lath and plaster, touching my clock. My hand was flat against the wall, and I could feel the tiny shiver of the case through the fabric of the house, and my heart was going so hard I was certain it would betray me through the plaster. Then the inner door lifted and closed again, and the room was silent, and my clock, I checked it against the chronometer at first light, the moment I decently could, was 6 minutes and 40 seconds slow. I sat in that dark pantry until the windows grayed, and I did a great deal of thinking, and none of it made sense. A person had entered a sealed, windowless, single-doored room without passing the guard at its only door, had done something to a clock, and had left the same way. There are only 2 explanations for a thing like that. Either the room had a second way and that no one knew of, or the person who came in the night was the one person with the room's only key, the keeper of the cabinet herself, and the guard at the door was letting her pass in silence and telling no one. I did not want to believe the second. It would have meant Corporal Wren was part of it, whatever asterisk it was, and it would have meant Lady Ashcombe was creeping into her own sealed relic room at 3 in the morning to fiddle with a clock, which was madness. But I am a clock keeper, and my whole trade is to distrust the pretty explanation and follow the ugly mechanism, and so the next night I did the thing I am proudest and most ashamed of in the whole affair. I did not sit in the pantry. I stood in the corridor in plain view, and I waited for Corporal Wren to come on his post, and I walked straight up to the still gray man at the door and I said, very low, "Corporal, I need you to tell me the truth about who goes into that room at night." I have never in my life seen a man go so completely still. He had been still before, it was his profession, but that was the stillness of a soldier at attention, a held thing, a made thing. This was different. This was the stillness of a man who has been carrying something heavy for a very long time and has just felt someone else take hold of the other end. For a long moment he did not answer. His pale eyes went once briefly to the sealed door, and once to the far end of the corridor where it turned toward the great officer's apartments, and then back to me, and he said, in a voice so quiet I felt it more than heard it, "Mistress Aldergate, how long have you known the clock was wrong?" Not what clock, not asterisk what do you mean, he knew about the clock. And in that one question, I understood that Corporal Havard Wren had been standing at that door for longer than 6 years of ordinary duty, that he had been watching something he could not prove and could not speak, and that he had just heard, for the first time, that he was not alone and not mad. It was the same relief I would feel myself later, and I recognized it even then. 3 weeks, I said. It loses 6 minutes and 40 seconds every day, and it's put back wrong every day, and there's no honest way for that to happen. And last night I heard someone in that room who did not come past you. So either there's a way into that room that isn't this door, or you're letting someone through it and lying to your officers. And I have to know which, Corporal, because I am the one who signs the daybook that says that clock is sound, and I will not sign a lie. Something moved in his gray face. It was not quite a smile. It was the loosening of a man who has decided, on the instant, to trust. And I have wondered since what it cost him, a warden of the inner posts whose entire discipline is the closed mouth, to open it to a clock keeper he had never spoken to in a corridor at 3 in the morning. But he had been alone with the thing for a long time, and I think he had prayed, in whatever way such men pray, for exactly one honest person to come and stand at his door and ask the right question. "There is a way into that room that is not this door," he said. "I have known it for 2 years. I have never once been able to prove it, and I have never once dared to speak it, because the only person it could accuse is the last person in the kingdom anyone would let me accuse. Mistress Aldergate, will you walk with me, and will you keep your voice down, and will you understand that from the moment I show you this, you and I are in a thing that could end us both?" I said that I would. He took me not to the cabinet room, but along the corridor the other way, past his own post, to the turn where the passage went toward the great officer's apartments. And there he stopped at a place where the paneling made a shallow blind recess that I had walked past 1,000 times and never once looked at. It was nothing, a dead corner where 2 runs of the old East Range wall met at an angle a hair off true, the kind of small dishonesty every ancient house is full of. Wren stood before it with his shaded lantern low and said nothing for a moment, and then he said, "Count the windows for me, mistress. From the garden in daylight, count the second-floor windows of this range, and then walk the corridor and count the rooms. You keep the clocks. You have a head for numbers. Do the sum I did 2 years ago, and could never make come right." I did not need daylight. I had walked that corridor twice a fortnight for 9 years, and I could see it in my head the way I could see the going train of any clock I had ever opened. 3 windows in the cabinet room, 2 in the keeper's own withdrawing room beyond it, and between them on the outside of the house, in the long face of stone I had watched from the physic garden 100 times while I waited for the light to be right. Between them there was a run of wall with 2 more windows in it. Blind windows, dressed and glazed and shuttered from within, exactly like the rest, so that from the garden the face of the range was a perfect regular thing. But from the corridor between the cabinet room and the keeper's withdrawing room there was no room at all, only this blind recess, and 11 feet of paneled passage that ought to have had a door in it, and did not. 2 windows, I said slowly. There are 2 windows in that wall from the garden, and no room behind them from the corridor. There is a room behind them, said Corporal Wren. I have never been in it. I have stood outside it every night for 6 years and known for 2 of them that it is there, and I will tell you how I know, and then you will understand why I have never spoken. He set the lantern down. 2 years ago, on a night when the Lady Ashcombe was away at her own house in the country and I was easy in my mind, I stood here at the turn where you and I stand now, and I heard very faintly through this wall a clock strike. Not the weaver's regulator, I know her voice, deep and slow. A small clock, a bright quick voice striking the half. There is no clock in the cabinet room but the regulator. There is no room here at all. And yet at 2:30 in the morning, in an empty stretch of wall in a sealed range, a little clock struck the half-hour to no one. I have heard it perhaps a dozen times since, always on the nights she dines in and retires early, never on the nights she is away. A hidden room, Mistress Aldergate, with a hidden clock in it that someone winds. And the only person in the Kingdom of Eldermoor with a key to this range, and the standing to build a room no surveyor dares to question, is the woman whose loyalty to the dead queen is the pride of the whole court. I stood in that corridor and felt the floor of everything I had believed tilt very slowly under me, the way the deck of the tower feels in a high wind. A hidden room, a hidden clock, and my own honest regulator, next door through the lath, being crept to and set wrong 6 minutes and 40 seconds every night, by a hand coming from I now understood exactly where, not through the cabinet room's guarded door at all, but from the far side, from the hidden room, through some connecting way that let a person pass from the secret chamber into the sealed relic room, and out again without ever troubling the corridor or the guard. The clock, I said. Corporal, the 6 minutes and 40 seconds, don't you see what it is? It isn't a fault, it's the door. I was talking too fast. I made myself slow down the way my father taught me to slow down over a stopped movement. A hidden room built into a sealed range. She would not want to walk in and out of the cabinet room's main door, past you, to reach it. So she goes in and out through the hidden room. But to open the way between the hidden room and the cabinet room from her side, without a visible door in the paneling. The simplest, cleverest, quietest catch a person could use would be the clock itself. The regulator stands against the party wall. Stop its pendulum, or move it, or reach into its case, and you could work a catch behind it that a maid dusting would never find, because who reaches inside a long case clock but the one keeper who winds it? Every time she uses that passage she disturbs the movement. 6 minutes and 40 seconds is not the room losing time. It is the clock being stopped and started while a door is worked behind it. She puts it back by guess in the dark, and she guesses the same wrong every night, because she is a great lady and not a horologist, and she has no idea that the one thing in that room she cannot fool is the one thing I keep. Corporal Wren looked at me for a long moment in the lantern light, and the almost smile came back to his gray face, and he said, 2 years I have stood at that door with a hidden clock striking in the wall, and no way on this earth to prove the wall was hollow, and you have proved it to me in a corridor in 3 minutes with a chronometer and a sum. He picked up the lantern. The Weaver Queen would have liked you, mistress. She had no patience for anyone who could not tell her how a thing actually worked. That should have been the end of my fear and the beginning of my triumph. We had it surely. A hidden room, a hidden clock, a secret door worked through my regulator, proof at last of a wrong. But I was to learn, in the weeks that followed, the hardest lesson of the whole affair, and it is the lesson Corporal Wren already knew and had been living inside for 2 years. That knowing a wrong and being able to answer it are 2 different countries, and the road between them is long, and it runs the whole way through the question of who will be believed. Because we still had nothing. We had a stopped clock and a soldier's ear and a sum about windows. Against that we had the Lady Verena Ashcombe, keeper of the cabinet, dearest friend of the sainted dead, the most trusted woman in the kingdom. If we spoke now, if Corporal Wren went to his captain, or I to the clerk of the household, and said there is a hidden room off the cabinet range, and we think the keeper of the relics goes into it at night, she would need only to smile and say that yes, of course there was an old muniment closet behind the paneling, sealed for damp, and that she went sometimes to sit with the late queen's things because she had loved her, and would we truly grudge a grieving old woman her private grief, and we would be finished. Wren would be posted to some gate in the rain. I would be the clock keeper who invented conspiracies about the noblest lady in the land, and I would take my mother out of the almshouse I could no longer pay for, and no one would ever look behind that wall. We need to see inside, I said. We cannot get inside, said Wren. There is no door I can find, and I will not force the cabinet room and break the queen's seal on a guess. Break that seal wrongly and we do not merely lose, we hand her the proof that we are the criminals. No, we wait and we watch, and we get a fact that will walk into daylight and be believed by a queen. Can you do that, mistress? Can you keep winding that clock and setting it right and saying nothing, knowing what you know? I thought of the sheeted loom, and the fire always laid, and the candle always ready, in the plain room where a good woman had done her thinking, kept exactly as she had left it as a promise to the whole country. And I thought that if someone had made a hollow in the wall of that promise, I wanted, more than I had ever wanted anything, to be the one who proved it. And I wanted to do it so well that it could never be waved away with a soft word and a gentle tear. I can wait, I said, but not forever, because whatever she's doing in there, she's still doing it. And a person only creeps into a dead friend's shrine at 3 in the morning, night after night, for 2 years, if there is something in that wall she cannot afford for anyone else to see. So we became watchers, and I will tell you that the watching was harder by far than any striking of the clock, because it asked of me a thing my trade had never asked, to hold still while I was afraid. We divided the work the way 2 honest people do when they are frightened and will not let it show. Wren watched the corridor and the door, as he had for 6 years, but now with a purpose and a witness. He kept a soldier's log in his head of every night she dined in and retired early, every night the little clock struck in the wall, every night the cabinet room door lifted softly in the dead hours. I watched the regulator. Twice a fortnight I wound it and set it right and read its confession like a doctor reading a fever chart, and I began to keep, in a locked drawer in the horology room, a second book that no underkeeper ever saw, a book of the clock's true losses, night by night, matched against Wren's tally of the nights the Lady Ashcombe was in residence. The two lines ran together like a rope twisting up. Every night she was in the palace and retired early, my clock lost its 6 minutes and 40 seconds. Every night she was away, it kept perfect time. There was no more doubt in it than there is in the rising of a tide. But a doctor's fever chart is not a confession, and a rope of correlation, however tight, is not a door you can open in front of a queen, and both of us knew it. The Weaver Queen had been a great believer in charts. I found that out in the second week, and it changed the whole shape of what we were doing, and I must tell it properly. I had begun, on my own account and telling no one but Wren, to learn the dead queen. It seemed to me that if the answer to any of this lay in that hidden room, it lay 11 years back, in the last months of Queen Isolde's life, and that I could not understand what was being hidden until I understood what there was to hide. So I did what a clock keeper can do that a soldier cannot. I asked for the household records, on the honest pretext of my own trade. I told the clerk of the records that I was writing up the maintenance histories of the palace clocks, which was true, and that I wanted the cabinet range accounts for the year the Weaver Queen died, to date the regulator's last full overhaul, which was also true, as far as it went. He gave me the ledgers without a second glance. Nobody suspects the clock keeper. It is the great advantage and the great loneliness of my trade. And in those ledgers, in the plain columns of a household's ordinary spending, I found the first crack in the Lady Ashcombe's perfect surface. The Weaver Queen, in her last year, had been dying slowly and had known it, and she had spent that year giving things away. I knew that much. The whole country knew it, for it was the last and most loved chapter of her life. The queen who, feeling death come, had summoned the guild masters and the hospice wardens and given into their hands the great endowments that keep the northern counties from ruin to this day. But the ledgers told a smaller, closer story than the country's story, and it was the smaller story that stopped my breath. In the last months, the Weaver Queen had also been quietly, personally, distributing her own private treasures, not the crown's but her own, the things that were hers to give, and she had been recording each gift in her own hand in a little vellum book that the ledger called, in the clerk's neat entry, H.M.'s Book of Bequests, held by the Keeper of the Cabinet. Held by the Keeper of the Cabinet, by Lady Ashcombe, a book in the dead queen's own hand, listing every private treasure she had meant to give away and to whom, entrusted at her death to her dearest friend to carry out her wishes, and never, that I could find in 11 years of subsequent records, produced, published, or fulfilled. There was no entry anywhere in the household accounts for the distribution of the Weaver Queen's personal bequests, the great public endowments, yes, celebrated and recorded down to the last coin, but her private book of small, particular gifts, this shawl to that goddaughter, this ring to that hospice, this loom to the guild school she had founded, that book had gone into Lady Ashcombe's keeping at the deathbed, and had simply, quietly, never come out again. I took this to Wren on a cold night at the turn of the corridor, in a whisper, and I watched the soldier in him weigh it. "It is not proof," he said at last, and he was right, and I loved him a little for saying it, because a lesser man would have wanted it to be proof. "It is a book that is missing." She could say she keeps it privately out of reverence. She could say the bequests were fulfilled quietly, without fuss, as the queen wished. She could say she has it still and will produce it when the family asks, and the family has never asked because the family trusts her. A missing book is not a hidden room, mistress. But, and here the pale eyes came up and held mine, but a hidden room with a hidden clock, built by the one person who holds a missing book of a dead queen's treasures, is beginning to be a shape. Do you see it? I have watched a door for 2 years and seen only that it was a door. You have shown me what might be behind it. Her treasures, I said. The word came out of me small and cold. The things in the book, she never gave them away. They're in the wall. We do not know that, said Wren. In the level voice I was coming to lean on the way you lean on a wall in the dark. We suspect it, and a queen does not act on a suspicion against the woman who held her mother's hand at the end. Wren. It was the first time he had used my given name, and I noticed it. We are close now to the most dangerous part of a thing like this. Close enough to be sure in ourselves and not close enough to prove it to anyone else. That is the ground where good people ruin themselves. They cannot bear the gap between knowing and proving, and they leap it and they fall. We will not leap. We will build the bridge, plank by plank, and we will walk across it in daylight with the queen watching. Will you help me build it and not leap? I said I would. I meant it. And within the week I very nearly broke my word, because the Lady Verena Ashcombe, who missed nothing, had begun to feel the floor move under her too. It began with a kindness, which is how the worst things in a palace always begin. I was in the horology room one gray afternoon, elbow-deep in the tower regulator, when the door opened without a knock and the Lady Ashcombe herself came in. I had never in 9 years been visited by so great an officer of the household in my own workshop, and I nearly dropped a jeweled palette on the floor. She was exactly as the court adored her, silver-haired, straight-backed, a soft gray gown, a face full of gentle attention, and a voice like warm milk. She looked about the room at all my clocks with every appearance of delight, and she said how she had always meant to come and see where the palace's time was mended, and how the late Queen, dear Isolde, she called her, with a small catch in the word, had so loved the sound of the cabinet clock, and how good it was of me to keep it so faithfully. And then, still smiling, still gentle, she said the thing she had come to say. I hear, she said, that you have been troubled by the old regulator, that it loses time. She let that sit in the air a moment, watching me over it, and I understood that she had read my daybook, or had it read to her, Weaver's regulator, losing 6 M40s daily, cause not yet found, and that she had come to find out how close the clock keeper was to the truth. My heart went very hard, and I made my hands go on cleaning the palette slowly, the way my father taught me to keep my hands honest when my face could not be. It is an old movement, I said. Old movements wander. I am watching it. And she smiled and said how wise, how patient, and then she said, oh, so lightly, so kindly, you know, I have been thinking. The cabinet room is to be closed a while. The paneling wants attention. There is damp getting into the old east wall, and I cannot bear the thought of dear Isolde's things taking harm. I mean to have the whole range sealed for the works, and the relics moved into my own keeping in the meantime, where I can watch them. So you need not trouble yourself with the regulator any longer, my dear. I shall have it seen to privately. You have quite enough to mind. She patted my workbench as though it were a good dog. Such a burden, an unreliable old clock. Let me take it off your hands. And she smiled, and she went, and I sat with the tower regulator in pieces in front of me, and understood that I had perhaps 4 days. Because everything she had said was reasonable, and all of it was a killing stroke. She was going to seal the range, close the corridor, close the cabinet room, remove Corporal Wren's post and my errand both, and she was going to move the relics into her private keeping and take the regulator away from me. Once that clock was out of my hands, no one on this earth would ever read its confession again. Once the range was sealed for the works, the hidden room could be quietly emptied, its contents dispersed or destroyed, the connecting way bricked up as part of the honest repair, and in a year there would be a beautifully refurbished cabinet room with a new mended clock that kept perfect time and told no tales, and a hidden chamber that had simply ceased to exist. She was not fleeing. She was tidying. And a great officer of the household tidying a damp old range is the most unanswerable thing in the world. I went to Wren that night nearly frantic, and it is the only time in the whole affair that he had to hold me still. She's going to seal it, I said. She's going to move the clock and close the range, and it will all be gone. Corporal, we have to go in, tonight. There is a connecting way behind that clock. I know there is. We open the cabinet room, we work the catch, We go into the hidden room and we see, and whatever we find we go straight to the queen with it before that woman can move a single thread. We have 4 days. We have to leap. And Corporal Havard Wren, who had stood at a door for 6 years and watched a wrong he could not prove, put out one steady hand and did not touch me, only held it in the air between us and said, "No. Havard, listen to me." His voice was very quiet and very level, and it was the most frightening thing about him, that levelness, because it was not the calm of a man who did not understand the danger, but of one who understood it entirely. "If we break the Queen's seal tonight, on our own authority, and go into that room, hear me, even if everything is exactly as we believe, even if the wall is full to the ceiling with the dead Queen's stolen treasures, we lose. Do you know what she says the next morning? She says the clock keeper and the night-warden broke the seal of the late Queen's shrine and were found in the relics in the dark. She does not have to prove we stole anything. She only has to be the one who reports it. She is the injured guardian. We are the 2 servants who forced a sacred room. We would be arrested by noon, and she would seal the range that afternoon with the full grief and blessing of the court, and the treasures would be gone within the week, and no one would ever look again, because looking would mean doubting the poor betrayed Lady Ashcombe. The restraint is the weapon, Wren. It is the only weapon we have that she cannot turn around in her hand. The moment we move wrongly, she wins. We do not go in. We make her be the one who is caught going in front of a witness she cannot dismiss." I stared at him. "And how," I said, "in 4 days do we do that?" And Corporal Wren told me his plan, and it was so simple and so patient and so daring that I understood, finally and completely, what the discipline of his kind was for. It was not for standing still while fools shouted. It was for this, for holding your hand off the door for 2 years and 6 years and 11 years until the one moment when moving would answer everything, and then moving once cleanly in the light where it could not be undone. "The clock," he said, "is the door. You told me so. She works the catch by disturbing the movement, and she puts it back by guess, and she is always the same wrong because she cannot read a clock the way you can. So, you are going to unguess it for her. You are going to go to that regulator tomorrow in daylight on your ordinary errand with no secret at all, and you are going to make one small, honest adjustment to it. Not to hide anything, to reveal it. And then we are going to let the Lady Verena Ashcombe walk into her own hidden room one last time, on the last night before she seals the range. And we are going to make certain that, when she does, the person standing in the cabinet room to see her come out of the wall is not a clock keeper and not a night warden, but someone whose word even she cannot wave away." "Who?" I said. "That," said Corporal Wren, "is the plank of the bridge I have not yet built, but I know who it must be, and I know how to reach her. Go and mind your clock, Wren, and trust me 4 more days. I want to tell you plainly what I did to the clock, because it is the pivot on which everything turned, and because it is the one part of the whole affair where I, and not Wren, was the craftsman, and I am proud of it. The weaver's regulator, like all fine long-case clocks, keeps time by the swing of its pendulum, and the length of that pendulum can be adjusted by a tiny knurled nut beneath the bob. Turn it up and the clock runs faster, turn it down and it runs slower, and a single full turn changes the rate by a matter of seconds a day. That is the ordinary work of my trade. I do it 100 times a year. But there is another thing about that clock, and about any clock whose case is being used to hide a catch, and it is this. The person working the secret catch must open the trunk door and reach past the pendulum to do it, and every time they do, they nudge the swing. If the swing is generous, a long, slow, wide arc, a clumsy hand in the dark disturbs it badly, stops it half a beat, and the clock loses a great gulp of time all at once, which is your 6 minutes and 40 seconds. But if the swing is small and tight and quick, a hand can pass it and scarcely trouble it at all. So I did not make the clock lose less time. I made it lose more, and I made it lose it loudly. I opened the movement in daylight, on my ordinary fortnightly errand, with the corridor door open and Corporal Wren's relief standing his post, and nothing in the least secret about it. And I fitted to the going train one small honest thing that any clockmaker keeps in his drawer, a strikework trip, a simple lever, robbed from a broken bracket clock, that I set so that if the pendulum were ever stopped for longer than a few seconds, as it must be, every time the catch behind the case was worked, the trip would fall, and when the pendulum was set going again, the clock would not merely resume, it would asterisk strike. Once. A single, deep, unmistakable note, the regulator's own deep voice, that it had never in its life been built to make, because it was a timepiece and not a striking clock and had no business striking at all. A clock that strikes when it has no strike is a thing that stops the heart of anyone who knows clocks. But the Lady Verena Ashcombe did not know clocks. To her, the deep single note in the dark would mean only one thing, that the old regulator had chimed once the way old things do and no more. She would not fear it. She would not understand it. But it would sound, every single time she worked that catch, ringing out through the wall into the corridor where a witness could stand, and hear it, and know past any denying that at that exact black hour a hand was moving behind the sealed clock of the sealed shrine. I set the strike and I closed the case, and I signed my daybook with a clear conscience for the first time in a month. Weaver's regulator, cause of fault identified, remedial trip fitted, under observation. Every word of it true. Let her read that. Let her think I had mended her clock and would trouble her no more. Then Corporal Wren built the last plank of his bridge, and it nearly broke us, because the witness he chose was the one I would never have dared to choose, and reaching her was the setback that came within a breath of ending everything. He chose the Queen. Not a captain, not a clerk, not even the Lord Chamberlain, Queen Saraland herself. It has to be her, he said, when I had finished being frightened enough to argue. Think, Wren. Whoever stands in that room and sees Verena Ashcombe come out of the wall, that person's word will be set against the most trusted woman in the kingdom. There is only one person in Eldermoor whose word outweighs the Lady Ashcombe's, and that is the woman who trusts her, the woman who is her queen and was the dead Weaver Queen's daughter. If the Queen sees it with her own eyes, there is no story Ashcombe can tell the next morning, because there is no morning after. The Queen was there. But if anyone less sees it, we are back in the mud. It must be the Queen, standing in that dark room herself, or it is no one. And how, I said for the second time in a week, do a clock keeper and a corporal of the night watch get a private word with the Queen in secret about the woman she loves most in the household without Ashcombe's people, who are everywhere, hearing of it before we finish the sentence? She has a lady in every anteroom, Havard. She reads the daybooks. She came to my workshop. If we ask for an audience, she knows within the hour. That was the wall we broke ourselves against for 2 of our 4 days. We could not reach the Queen. Every ordinary road to her ran through the household, through appointments and secretaries and ladies-in-waiting, and the keeper of the cabinet had a friend or a debtor at every turn of that road. Wren could not simply walk up to his sovereign. A corporal of the inner watch who broke the chain to seek the Queen in private would be stopped, questioned, and reported before he reached the second anteroom, and the report would go to exactly the wrong ears. I could not do it. A clock keeper does not request the Queen. We tried in our minds a dozen routes, and every one of them passed under Lady Ashcombe's window. On the evening of the second day, I sat in the horology room with my head in my hands, and thought that we had seen the whole shape of the wrong, laid it bare, understood it to the last tooth of the last wheel, and would lose, because we could not get one honest hour with the one person who could answer it. And in 2 more days the range would be sealed, and the treasures gone, and the truth walled up forever behind a mended clock. It was Wren who found the road, and he found it in the most unlikely place in the palace, and it is the part of the story I love best, because it turned on a child. Not on any grand thing. On the fact that Corporal Havard Wren, the invisible night-warden, had one friend in the whole of the house of Harrowgate who could carry a word to the Queen, without passing under any officer's window, and that friend was 8 years old. Her name was Princess Malin, and she was the Queen's daughter, and she could not sleep. I learned all this from Wren on the third night, in pieces, the way he told everything. The Princess Malin was a grave, curious little person of 8, with her great-grandmother's stubbornness and her grandmother the Weaver Queen's love of making things, and she was, like a great many clever children, a poor sleeper. On the nights the terrors kept her awake, she would slip out of the nursery wing and go wandering the dark corridors in her nightgown, and it was the night-wardens who found her always, and walked her gently back, never scolding, never reporting it up, because a frightened child at midnight is not a matter for the daybooks. For 2 years it had most often been Corporal Wren who found her, on his own long corridor, and he had done for her exactly what a good warden does. He had made the dark house safe. He had taught her the names of the sounds. That groan is the heating pipe, that tick is the old clock, that is only the wind in the east wall, until the corridors that had frightened her became a place she half loved, full of friendly noises and one large quiet soldier who always seemed to be there. Her brother, Prince Joran, who was 10 and slept like a stone, teased her for her wanderings. Her father, the Prince Consort Aldrich, thought she had simply grown out of them. Only Wren, and now I, knew that the Princess Malin still walked the corridors 2 or 3 nights a week, and that she trusted the still gray man at the cabinet door more entirely than she trusted anyone in the daylight world. "I will not use her," Wren said, and his voice when he said it was harder than I had ever heard it. "Understand me, Wren. I will not put that child near that room, or near that woman, or near any part of the danger. Whatever else this costs, it will not cost her a single frightened night. But she carries messages to her mother that no one else can carry, because no lady-in-waiting reads a note a sleepy child brings to her own mother's bed at dawn, and no officer questions a princess in her nightgown. She has carried me 100 small things without ever knowing she carried anything. Tell your mother the east corridor lamp wants mending. Tell your mother the tower struck 13 and made me laugh. Small true things, a warden's foolishness, a way for a lonely child to feel she has an errand. The Queen knows they come from the night watch. She reads them the way you read a servant's affectionate nonsense. And that," he said, "is a road to the Queen that runs under no one's window at all. If I give the child one more true small thing to carry, not a word about Ashcombe, not a word about the room, nothing she could ever be made to repeat to harm, only enough that the Queen herself will understand she must come, alone, and stand once in the dark and see, then we have our witness, and the child is never touched by any of it." It took him the whole of that third night to write it. I helped him, and it was the strangest composition I have ever had a hand in, a message that had to say everything to one reader and nothing to any other, that a sleepy 8-year-old could carry as innocent nonsense, and a watchful mother could unlock as a summons. In the end it was very short, and it was built entirely out of the dead Weaver Queen, because that was the one key we were sure the Queen and no one else would turn. The princess carried it 2 nights later, at the gray edge of dawn, in her own hand, having found Corporal Wren at his post on one of her wandering nights exactly as he had known she would. He gave her a folded paper and told her it was a message for her mother from the old clock, which delighted her, and he told her to give it into her mother's hand herself and no one else's, which she solemnly promised, and then he walked her back to the edge of the nursery wing and said good night, and that was the whole of the child's part in it, and it was over before she was well awake. She never knew. To this day, so far as I am aware, the Princess Malin believes she once carried a friendly message from a clock, and nothing more, and that is exactly as it should be. What the paper said, I know by heart because I helped make it. "Your Majesty," it read, "forgive a soldier who has stood a long time at a quiet door and seen a wrong he could not speak. It touches your mother and her gifts and the room where she worked. I ask nothing and accuse no one. I ask only this, that you come, alone and telling no one, to the cabinet room, tomorrow at 2 in the morning, and stand in the dark and wait, and see with your own eyes what I have not the standing to make you believe with words. If I am wrong, no harm is done, and you may break me for troubling you. If I am right, only you can answer it, and it must be you who sees. Come as your mother would have come, quietly and with your own 2 hands, a warden of your house. We did not know, sending it, whether it would work. We did not know whether the Queen would come, or would send her guard, or would show it to the Lady Ashcombe over breakfast and end us both by noon. That was the last and worst of the waiting, the whole of the next day, going about my clocks with my hands steady and my heart in ruins, not knowing whether by 2 the following morning I would be a witness to justice or a prisoner of the household. Wren stood his post that night as though nothing in the world were happening. I do not know how he did it. I asked him, long afterward, and he said only that a man who cannot stand still in the hour before everything is decided has no business standing at a door at all. At 1:30 in the morning, on the last night before the range was to be sealed, I let myself into the little disused pantry that shared the cabinet room wall, in my soft shoes, with my chronometer and no candle, and I sat down in the dark to listen for the deep single strike of a clock that had no business striking, and to pray, in whatever way a clock keeper prays, that when it rang, there would be a queen in the next room to hear it. She came. That was the first miracle, and I did not know it had happened until much later, because from my pantry I could see nothing and could only listen. But she came. At 1:45, alone, in a plain dark cloak over her nightgown, having told no one and brought no guard, Queen Saralyn of Eldermoor unlocked the cabinet room with the master key that only the sovereign holds, and let herself into the sealed shrine of her mother, and stood in the dark by the sheeted loom, and waited, exactly as a soldier's strange note had asked her to. I have wondered 1,000 times what moved her to trust it. I think it was the last line. Come as your mother would have come, quietly, and with your own 2 hands. No one who did not love the Weaver Queen could have written that, and no one who wished the Queen harm would have thought to. She told me afterward that she read those words and knew she would go, and dressed, and went, and stood in her mother's room in the dark, not knowing whether she was there to catch a traitor or to comfort a mad old soldier, only that a warden of her house had asked her to see, and that a queen who would not stand 1 hour in the dark to see a wrong done to her own mother was not fit to be one. And Corporal Wren stood his post outside the door, as he had 10,000 knights, and gave no sign at all that anything in the world was different, that behind him in the dark room stood his queen, and that everything he had held still for 6 years was about to move. I sat in the pantry with my hand flat on the cold wall and my chronometer open on my knee, and I listened to the great house breathe, and I waited. At 2:08, I heard the little clock strike in the hidden room. It was exactly as Wren had described it 2 years before, a bright, quick, foreign voice striking the quarter, a small mantel clock somewhere behind the blind windows in the walled-up chamber being wound. She was in there. The Lady Verena Ashcombe was in her hidden room, in the dead of the last night before the works, doing whatever she had come 2 years of nights to do. My heart went so hard I pressed my fist against it. Any moment now she would work the catch behind the regulator to pass from the hidden room into the cabinet room, perhaps to look one last time at the relics she was about to have moved into her private keeping, perhaps to carry something out. And when she disturbed the pendulum, my trip would fall, and the regulator would ring its impossible single note, and the Queen standing 3 feet away in the dark would hear a clock strike that could not strike, and would turn, and would see the wall open, and would see her mother's dearest friend come out of it like a thief in the night. If she was there, if she had come, I did not know. I would not know until it was over. That was the hardest minute of my life, that minute of not knowing, sitting blind in the dark with everything decided and nothing yet revealed. Then, through the wall, I heard the deep single strike of the weaver's regulator. One note, my note, The clock that could not strike striking as a clumsy hand in the dark passed the pendulum to work the catch behind the case. It rang out through the sealed room like a stone dropped into a well, and I heard, half a heartbeat after it, the soft grind of the concealed door swinging back behind the great clock. And then I heard, muffled but unmistakable through 11 inches of lath, the voice of Queen Saralind, low and clear and terrible in its quietness, say 4 words into the dark. "Hello, Verena. Show me." I have been told since, by the Queen herself, and by the 2 members of the guard who came at Wren's whistle a moment later, exactly what the cabinet room held in that instant, and I will set it down as it was told to me, because I was only the ears of it and not the eyes, and the eyes deserve their proper account. The Lady Verena Ashcombe stood half in and half out of the wall. The concealed door, a whole section of the paneling, swung on a hidden iron frame, its catch released by a lever that ran up behind the regulator's case exactly where I had said it must stood open behind her, and beyond it, lit by the small lamp she carried, was the hidden room, and the hidden room was full. It was full of the Weaver Queen. Not treasure in the way a thief hoards treasure, not gold, not jewels heaped in chests. Worse than that and sadder. It was full of the asterisk things, the particular, personal, loved things, out of the dead queen's own book of bequests. Every private gift she had meant to give away in her last dying months, and never given because the woman she had trusted to give them had kept them all. The great coronation shawl Queen Isolde had woven with her own hands, that she had left to the guild school she founded, folded in tissue on a shelf. The signet ring that had been her mother's and her mother's mother's, meant for her goddaughter in a velvet tray. Spools of the rare sea-purple thread, the dye whose secret the Weaver Queen had brought back from the fishing coasts and meant to give to the Dyers' Guild, ranked on the wall like a miser's coin. Bundles of letters in the Queen's own hand, letters to the hospice children, to the guild masters, to her friends, tied with ribbon and never sent. A small mantel clock, still ticking, its bright, quick voice the one Wren had heard through the wall for 2 years, that the Queen had loved and left to a hospice in the north. And in the center of it all, on a little writing slope, open, the vellum book of bequests itself, the dead Queen's last testament of love, in her own failing hand, listing every treasure in that room and the name of the person to whom it should have gone. Lady Ashcombe had not sold them. That was the thing that broke the Queen's heart, she told me, more than a common theft would have. She had kept them. For 11 years she had crept into a hidden room she had built with a household's own secret funds and sat among the dead Queen's things and had asterisked them, all of them. The whole of the love the Weaver Queen had tried to send out into the country in her last months, hoarded in the dark behind a false wall, because she could not bear, this woman who had loved the Queen and stood in her shadow all her life, to let those beloved things go out to strangers. She had wanted them. She had told herself, I think, that she was protecting them, keeping them safe, keeping the Queen close. But a dying woman's last gifts, kept back from the poor and the young she meant them for and hidden in a wall for one grieving heart's own comfort, is not love. It is theft of the deepest kind, and it had gone on for 11 years, under the pride of the whole court, guarded by a false devotion so perfect that no one in the Kingdom of Eldermoor had ever thought to look. No one but a night-warden with a good ear, and a clock-keeper who would not sign a lie. "Your Majesty," said Lady Ashcombe, and her warm milk voice, I am told, did not even shake, so long had she been the mistress of every room she stood in. "You should not be here. This is a private grief. I keep her things as she would have." "She left them away," said the Queen, "every one. I have read the book you are standing beside, Verena. I read it just now, while you fussed your little clock because you left it open after 11 years of my believing it lost. She left the shawl to the school. She left the ring to Elsa's girl. She left the letters to the children they were written for. She left all of it away, out of her own dying hands, to the whole of my country, and you built a wall and you kept it. You kept her. And here, they tell me, the Queen's terrible quiet broke just once into something worse. You held her hand at the end. She trusted you with the last things she loved. And you took them into a hole in the wall and kept them from the world she gave them to. And you stood in my mother's room every birthday and wept over an empty promise. And you let me thank you. 11 years, Verena. You let me thank you. It was then that Corporal Wren blew his whistle. He had waited, and this is the part of him I want you to carry away from all of this. He had waited until the Queen had seen and known and said what she had to say before he moved at all. He could have burst in at the first strike. He could have made himself the hero, the vigilant warden who took the traitor. He did not. He stood at his door and let his Queen have the truth first, with her own eyes and in her own time, because it was hers to have. And only when Lady Ashcombe cornered, made the smallest move toward the writing slope, toward the open book, whether to seize it or to burn it no one will ever know. Only then did the still gray man move once cleanly, and put himself between the keeper of the cabinet and the dead Queen's last testament, and blow the whistle that brought the night watch running. There was no violence in it. There is a picture the country has made of that night, in the way countries do, all torches and drawn steel, and it is nonsense. There was a quiet room, and an old woman who had run out of story to tell, and a soldier standing with his back to a book and his eyes forward, exactly as he had stood at that door 10,000 nights, and a Queen with tears on her face and iron in her voice giving her first order. "Nothing in this room is to be touched or moved," said Queen Saraland. "Not one thread. It is all to be listed before witnesses against the book in my presence at first light. Corporal, hold this room. No one enters, no one takes anything out, until I return with the Lord Chamberlain and the Master of the Rolls. Not even I." And Wren said, "Ma'am," in the flat, quiet voice of a man being handed exactly the duty he was made for, and held it. They took the Lady Verena Ashcombe away without a hand laid on her, walking, her silver head high, and she said nothing more that night. What she had done was, in the end, not a crime of the ordinary kind. There was a great and delicate question, the lawyers said for months afterward, of whether keeping a dead person's bequests unfulfilled was theft or a mere breach of trust, and it was argued at length in rooms I never saw. But the Queen had cut through all of that in the first gray hour, standing in her mother's room, and the country cut through it with her when the story came out, as such stories do. It did not matter, to a leaner in her almshouse, or to the guildmaster's son, or to the hospice children of the North, whether the law had a tidy name for it. What mattered was that a good and dying Queen had reached out her hands to give her country the last of her love, and one trusted person had caught those gifts in the dark and kept them for herself for 11 years, and that the wrong had been found and answered, and the gifts sent home at last to the hands they were meant for. I was led out of my pantry a little after 3, stiff and shaking, by a member of the watch who did not know why I was there and was too well trained to ask, and I stood in the corridor as they brought the lamps, and I saw, through the open door, the hidden room laid bare at last, and I confess I wept. Not for the treasure, for the letters. All those letters in the Weaver Queen's own hand, to children and friends and workers she had loved, written from her deathbed and tied with ribbon and never sent. 11 years those people had gone without the last kind word a dying Queen had written them, because one woman could not let go. That was the theft that undid me. A ring can be given late. A letter given 11 years late is a grief that cannot quite be mended, only honored. And the Queen had them all sent afterward, everyone, with a note in her own hand explaining gently where they had been. And I am told that in cottages and hospices and guild halls all across the North there are framed on the walls 2 letters side by side. The Weaver Queen's, 11 years delayed, and her daughter's, explaining the delay, and that the second is loved almost as much as the first. But that is the country's part of the story, and this is meant to be Corporal Wren's, and mine and the clock's, so let me bring it home to the 3 of us, and to the man whose stillness held the whole of it up. I did not see the Queen again for 11 days. The palace was a storm of quiet business, the listing of the room, the questioning, the great and careful unwinding of 11 years of trust. Wren stood his ordinary post through all of it and said nothing to anyone, and when I passed him in the corridor we did not speak, only met each other's eyes once, and that was enough. I went back to my 211 clocks. I wound the tower regulator and the little carriage clock on the Queen's desk, and twice the weaver's regulator itself, which now stood in an open, unsealed, sunlit cabinet room with its false wall standing wide, and which I set exactly right, and which never lost 6 minutes and 40 seconds again, because no clumsy hand in the dark ever worked the catch behind it again. I took out the strike trip I had fitted. The regulator was a timepiece, not a striking clock, and it had done its one great strike and deserved to go back to its honest silent work. And I keep that little lever still in the drawer of my father's bench. And sometimes I take it out and turn it in my fingers and think about how the whole thing had turned on a piece of a broken bracket clock, and a sum about windows and a soldier who could stand still. On the 12th day, the Queen sent for us both. I had never been in the Queen's private sitting room, and I stood in it now in my working apron, having had no warning, beside Corporal Wren in his plain dark uniform, the two of us as out of place among the silk, and the good light as two tools left on a dinner table. The Prince Consort Aldrich was there, quiet at the window, and the Queen came in without ceremony and looked at us for a long moment, and then she did a thing I will remember on the day I die. She thanked us, and she asked our forgiveness. "You knew," she said, "for 2 years and 3 weeks that something was wrong in my mother's rooms, and you did not come to me with a suspicion or a fear or a whisper you could not prove, which would have made me doubt you and defend her and warn her without knowing it and lose the truth forever. You waited. You held it, both of you, at a terrible cost to yourselves, until you could put it in front of me in a way I could not refuse to see. Do you understand what you did? You did not trust me with your doubt. You trusted me with the asterisk proof. You made me able to see it for myself, so that no one could ever tell me I had been deceived into believing you. That is not disloyalty, Corporal. That is the deepest loyalty there is, the loyalty that would rather suffer in silence than spend its Queen's trust on a guess. My mother had a name for it. She called it the patience of good hands. She used to say that anyone can pull a thread, but it takes a craftsman to know the one moment to pull it so the whole cloth comes true. She looked at me when she said craftsman, and I understood she had been told about the clock and about the strike, and I have never in my life been prouder of my trade. She offered Corporal Wren advancement, a captaincy, a daylight post, honors. He asked instead to keep his door. "I am a night-warden, ma'am," he said in the flat, quiet voice. "It is the work I am for. If it please you, I would like to go back to standing at a quiet door and noticing what is wrong with it. Someone must." And the Queen looked at him a long moment and understood, I think, that she was being taught something about honor by a corporal, and she let him keep his door, though she also, quietly, saw to it that his mother in the fishing town had a pension for the rest of her days, and that the scholarship the Weaver Queen had founded for the children of the coast bore, from that year on, a second name beside hers in small letters that only a few people know the reason for. The cabinet room is open now. That was the Queen's own decision, and the country loves her for it. The false wall stands wide, the hidden room laid bare and lit, and the two rooms have been made one. The plain working room where a good queen did her thinking, and the dark hollow where a false friend hid her love. The relics that were truly bequests went home, all of them, to the schools and the hospices and the goddaughters they were meant for, and the room keeps only what the Weaver Queen meant it to keep: the loom strung and ready, the fire laid, a candle set out as though she has only stepped into the garden, and at her shoulder the weaver's regulator keeping honest time. Beside the loom there is a small card now in the Queen's own hand, and it does not tell the story of the theft, because the Queen said the room should not be a monument to what one person took, but to what her mother gave. It says only, "Here she made useful things with her own 2 hands and gave them away and asked us to do the same, kept honest by those who watched." I keep the regulator still. Twice a fortnight I wind it and set it right, and it has never lost a wrong minute since. Sometimes when I have finished, I stand a moment in that open sunlit room where two rooms used to be, and I think about the 6 minutes and 40 seconds, how a clock cannot help telling the truth of whatever hand last touched it, and how, for 11 years, no one had thought to read the truth it was telling, until two people who had every reason to look away chose instead to stand still, and watch, and wait, and pull the one thread at the one right moment. Corporal Wren stands his door. I keep my clocks. The Weaver Queen is honored, and her gifts are where she meant them to be. And if you ever walk the east range of Harrowgate Palace in the small hours, you will not, but if you did, you might pass a large, quiet man in a plain dark uniform standing in a doorway, so still you would take him for part of the house, his eyes forward, noticing everything. Do not mistake his stillness for sleep, or for emptiness, or for a man who does not care. It is the most watchful thing in the kingdom. It is the whole of his strength. And once it was the whole of ours.